This goes back to 2005. I was 18, barely an adult and still figuring things out. At the time, I was living in Uvalde, Texas, in a low-income neighborhood like so many you'll find scattered across rural Texas, miles away from anything that really feels like a city. The nearest one was San Antonio. I was enrolled at a local community college, not because it was my dream school, but because it was the only option my parents could realistically afford. One of my closest friends from high school, Andrew, had moved to San Antonio to attend San Antonio College. He lived just outside the city in a small, cramped apartment with a roommate, and his girlfriend practically lived there too. Since San Antonio was only about an hour and a half away, I visited him pretty often. One weekend, he asked me to come crash at his place for the night, so I loaded myself into my old 1995 Toyota pickup. Calling it trusty would be generous. Honestly, that thing was a piece of junk. The gas gauge didn't even work. Every trip meant mentally tracking when I last filled up and resetting the trip meter, hoping I'd guessed right. I took Route 90, a long, straight stretch from Uvalde to San Antonio. I left around 3 in the afternoon on a Friday, and the road was completely empty, just heat, asphalt, and open sky. I made it to Andrew's place without any trouble. His girlfriend wasn't arriving until the next day, so that night was just supposed to be about hanging out. We stopped by a liquor store, drank back at his apartment with his roommate, and eventually headed out to a sketchy dive bar, the kind that didn't ask too many questions about IDs. That pretty much summed up the night. We grabbed food afterward and got back to the apartment around 2 in the morning. I crashed on the couch. The next day should have been more of the same, but it wasn't. Andrew and his girlfriend spent the entire day arguing. As the night went on and the drinking picked up, she started yelling at him right in front of me. The tension filled the room, and the whole situation became painfully awkward. I barely drank at all. I already felt uneasy staying there with her around. Eventually, I decided it was best to leave. I said my goodbyes, got into my truck, and started the drive home. It was late, probably around midnight, maybe a little earlier, when I pulled out and headed back into the dark. Route 90 was completely empty at that hour, and for my old pickup, that meant I was practically flying. The road stretched endlessly ahead of me, nothing but darkness and pavement. Then, out of nowhere, the engine began to sputter. My stomach dropped instantly. That sinking realization hit me all at once. I had forgotten to fill the tank. I eased off the gas, already knowing it wouldn't matter. A few seconds later, the engine died completely. I coasted to the shoulder and tried turning the key a few times, listening to it struggle before falling silent again. Nothing. I pulled out my cell phone, about as reliable as the truck itself, and checked for a signal. Nothing. Not even a single bar. I couldn't call anyone. I couldn't do anything except turn on my hazard lights and sit there, hoping someone decent would come along. I don't know how long I was stuck on the side of the road before I finally saw headlights in the distance. I jumped out and waved my arms as hard as I could. The car blew past me without slowing down. 10 minutes later, it happened again. Another set of headlights. Another driver who didn't even hesitate. That's when the hopelessness really settled in. I started thinking my best option might be to just sleep in the truck and wait for daylight. At least then I could figure something out. So I climbed back inside, pulled the key from the ignition to save what little battery I had left, and leaned my seat back. Every 10 minutes or so, a car would rush past, but I stopped trying to flag anyone down. Standing in the dark like that felt unsafe for me and for them. Just as I was starting to drift off, the sharp sound of a car door slamming shut jolted me awake. My heart started racing. I checked the rearview mirror and saw a vehicle pulled up behind me, with its headlights completely off. I twisted around to look. It was a large pickup truck, sitting there silently. I couldn't see anyone inside. I didn't see anyone outside either. Maybe someone had stopped to help. I stepped out and said, "Excuse me." No answer. I walked closer, peering inside the cab, empty. I went back to my truck, confused and uneasy. I glanced toward the trees lining the road, thinking maybe whoever it was had stepped off to take a leak. Still, something didn't feel right. I got back inside, locked the doors, and sat there in silence. Then, tap, a sudden knock on my window made me jump. I turned my head and saw a man standing right there, leaning down to look into the truck, smiling at me. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. He leaned in and said, "Hey buddy, need a hand?" I cracked the window just enough to talk and told him, "Yeah, I ran out of gas." He nodded, still smiling, and replied, "That's quite the predicament. Step out and give me a hand with something real quick." At the time, I assumed he meant grabbing a gas can or helping him unload something from his truck. It didn't raise any alarms. So I stepped out, closed my door behind me, and waited for him to lead the way. Instead, he just stood there. He was tall, taller than I realized at first, and he looked down at me with that same calm smile and said, "I need you to empty your pockets, please." It took a second for the words to register. When they did, my stomach dropped. I was a broke college kid driving a barely functioning pickup. The few bucks in my wallet and my phone were all I had. There was no way I was giving them up. I bolted toward the trees without thinking. I was small, but I was fast. I glanced back and saw he was already chasing me. The moment I hit the tree line, I started zigzagging, weaving between trunks and branches, running on pure adrenaline. Eventually, I didn't hear him directly behind me anymore. I crouched behind a thick tree, struggling to catch my breath. When I heard footsteps closing in again, I forced myself to breathe quietly. Then I heard his voice cut through the darkness. "I'll kill you, you piece of shit." I don't know if he was just raging or if he wanted me to hear it, but either way, I froze. I didn't move. Even after his footsteps faded away, I stayed exactly where I was. I remained hidden there for the rest of the night, eventually lying flat behind that tree until dawn broke. When the sun finally came up, I made my way back to the highway. His truck was gone, but my own truck was sitting there with both doors wide open. My glove box had been rummaged through and emptied of anything remotely valuable. My flannel hoodie was missing too, and I know there was something in its pocket. Eventually, I managed to flag down a good Samaritan. He gave me a ride to the nearest gas station, where I bought a fuel can and filled it up. He drove me back, waited while I poured just enough gas into the tank, and followed me to the station so I could fill it completely. After that, I went straight home. That night taught me something real. There are people out there who will absolutely take advantage of you when you're vulnerable. But there are also genuinely good people who will help when you need it most. At 18, I was immature, naive, and honestly kind of a jerk on the road, honking when I got impatient, cutting people off without thinking twice. Looking back now, it was stupid. And if I ever have kids, I'll be a lot stricter with them about driving, because some lessons only need to be learned once. That said, I actually drove a lot for someone my age. My school was about 5 hours away from home, and no matter what day of the week it was, traffic always became unbearable the closer I got. Because of that, I learned pretty quickly that driving home at night during breaks was the only way to stay sane. What was usually a 4 or 5 hour crawl could turn into a smooth 3-hour drive if I left late enough. This was right at the start of winter break, just after the fall semester ended. All my friends packed up and left earlier in the day. I waited until much later that night to head out. Traffic is one of the few things that genuinely makes my blood boil. At the time, I was driving a Mazda 3, and I'll be the first to admit I drove that thing hard. I also had a bad habit of pushing the gas tank way farther than I should have. Anyone who rode with me would comment on it, especially once the needle dipped past empty. I'd always brush it off, confidently telling them the car still had at least 30 miles left even after hitting E. That confidence came back to bite me the night I was driving home from school. I was barely an hour into my drive on the interstate when the needle was sitting firmly on empty. Instead of pulling up a map and finding the nearest gas station, I kept pushing forward, watching for a sign and telling myself I'd be fine. Then the car started making these strange noises, jerking slightly, shuddering in a way it never had before. That's when it hit me. I might have actually run it dry this time. I took the very first exit I saw, praying it would lead straight to a gas station. Instead, I found myself on a pitch black ramp with no streetlights and nothing but thick woods on either side. I was afraid to slow down, worried that if I lost momentum, I wouldn't make it anywhere at all. I blew straight through the stop sign at the bottom of the ramp and took the turn onto another road far too fast. That road was just as dark, just as empty, and just as surrounded by trees. I knew then I was in trouble. The car finally sputtered one last time before rolling to a stop, the engine dying completely. As if things weren't bad enough, I pulled out my phone and saw I had no signal whatsoever. I had T-Mobile, absolutely useless anywhere that wasn't close to a city. In a moment of panic and stupidity, I tried calling 911, thinking it might work without service. Of course it didn't. I was terrified, frozen by the fact that I genuinely didn't know what to do next. I switched on my hazard lights and sat there in the dark, waiting and hoping someone, anyone, would come along. A long stretch of time passed before I finally saw headlights approaching in the distance. When they got closer, I flashed my own headlights. The car drove past me, then slowed, made a U-turn, and pulled off onto the grass behind my car. My heart started pounding. I had no idea who was stepping out of that vehicle, and I was an 18-year-old girl, completely alone and defenseless. As the man walked toward my car, I only cracked the window open an inch or two. I told him I needed help, that I'd run out of gas. He said he could give me a ride to the nearest gas station. He was balding, wearing glasses, and looked fairly ordinary. Nothing about him immediately screamed danger. And honestly, I didn't feel like I had any real choice. I stepped out of my car, made sure to lock the doors, and followed him to his vehicle. It was a black Honda, probably around a 2010 model. The moment I got inside, I noticed a strange smell. It wasn't overpowering, just off. I couldn't quite figure out what it was, but it made me uneasy. He made another quick U-turn and headed back in the direction he'd originally been driving. He kept talking the entire time, asking where I was from and other casual questions. I told him the truth, that I was heading home from school. He mentioned that he lived nearby and said they didn't get many people exiting the interstate into this small, quiet town. As we drove, I realized there were no buildings anywhere around us, no houses, no stores, just endless woods lining both sides of the road. I asked him if he knew where the gas station was, and he casually replied, "Yeah, it's just a little ways up the road." Not long after that, I started hearing a dull bumping and thumping sound coming from behind us. It sounded like it was coming from the trunk. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe something loose back there or the uneven road. He didn't acknowledge it at all. He just kept talking non-stop, as if he was determined not to let the silence settle in. Eventually, we reached what finally looked like a real town. There were streetlights, a few buildings, and for the first time since getting into his car, I felt a small sense of relief. I saw a diner, a handful of houses, and then a red light. The first intersection we'd stopped at since I climbed into his car. The car came to a halt, and suddenly everything went quiet. No talking, no engine noise beyond the idle, just silence. Then it happened. I heard a scream, clear, desperate, unmistakable, coming from the trunk. It was immediately followed by violent thumps and banging, like someone was fighting to get out. My blood ran cold. I turned and looked at the man. He looked back at me. In that single moment, instinct took over. I unbuckled my seatbelt, threw the door open, and ran. As I did, he lunged for me, grabbing at my arm and trying to pull me back inside the car. I ripped free and kept running. I heard his door open behind me, and for a split second I thought he was chasing me. Instead, he rushed to slam the passenger door shut, jumped back into the car, and floored it down the street, disappearing into the darkness. I ran straight into the diner, hysterical, yelling for help and drawing every eye in the place. They let me use the phone, and I immediately called 911. Not long after, the diner was filled with police. Multiple officers arrived to take my statement. Because of how serious my report was, that I'd heard someone screaming from the trunk. They needed every detail I could remember. His appearance, the car, the direction we drove, where he picked me up. Everything. They even drove me back to my car so they could document the exact pickup location for the report. The officers also helped me contact AA, who eventually came out and put enough gas in my tank for me to get moving again. That night was the most terrifying experience of my life. I was shaken for the entire drive home, replaying everything over and over in my head. I still hope they found that man. And more than anything, I hope whoever was trapped in that trunk survived. For all I know, he could have been taking me somewhere far worse. The only reason I'm here is because that red light gave me a chance to escape. I live in Burke County, near Morganton, and I'm used to the kind of quiet that comes with rural life. Out here, nights are dark, roads are empty, and every so often you run into someone a little strange, but most of the time, nothing truly alarming happens. My husband and I own a decent, sized piece of land, and life is usually peaceful. My work schedule isn't consistent, though. Some weeks I work days, other weeks I'm stuck on nights. This happened after one of those night shifts, on my drive home around 3 in the morning. I was exhausted. My phone battery was almost dead, my stomach was growling, and all I wanted was something to eat before finally getting home. I stopped at a gas station, put $10 worth of gas on the pump, and grabbed a packaged sandwich from inside. I ate it in the small cafe area, trying to wake myself up. While I was sitting there, a sketchy-looking guy kept glancing over at me. He lingered for a bit, Never bought anything and eventually walked out. I brushed it off, finished eating, and went back outside to pump my gas. After filling up, I got back into my car, immediately noticing how strong the smell of gasoline was, stronger than usual, almost overwhelming. Once I pulled back onto the road, I slowed down. These roads are narrow, dark, and winding at night, and being tired made me extra cautious. That's when something unexpected happened. The gas needle suddenly dropped straight to E. The low fuel light came on, flashing and beeping at me. I had no idea what was happening. I'm not a car person, and I had never run out of gas before. It didn't make sense, especially since the needle dropped all at once. At first, I assumed the car's computer was glitching. I pulled over, turned the car off, and restarted it, hoping the gauge would reset. It didn't. The needle stayed pinned to empty. I tried to keep driving anyway, telling myself I could make it just a little farther. Within moments, the engine sputtered and shut off completely. That's when the panic hit. My chest tightened, my breathing went shallow, and I felt a full-blown panic attack setting in as I sat there alone on a dark rural road in the middle of the night. The first thing I did was call my husband, and I felt immediate relief when he answered. I asked him how it was even possible that my car had run out of gas when I had just filled it up minutes earlier. As I stepped out of the car, the smell of gasoline hit me again, strong and unmistakable. I told him that, and his response was immediate. He said it sounded like I might have a fuel leak. He told me to stay calm, that he was on his way, and that he'd contact roadside assistance. Then I heard a car approaching. No headlights, just the sound of tires on the road. It slowed and came to a stop not far behind my car. My heart dropped. Instantly, my mind went back to the sketchy man at the gas station, the way he'd been watching me. I asked my husband if there was any chance someone could have done something to my car. His tone changed immediately, shifting from calm to worried. He said, "Yes. There's a chance he could have cut your fuel line." I didn't fully understand what that meant, but I knew one thing for certain. I needed to get away. I pulled the keys from the ignition, shut the door quietly, and locked it so the headlights would turn off. My phone battery was down to 2%. I told my husband to text me when he got close, then I ran straight off the road toward the nearest house I could see. I sprinted down a long driveway and up to the front door. The house was completely dark. Every light was off. I rang the doorbell anyway, over and over, praying someone was home. After what felt like forever, a light flicked on inside. The door opened, and a man in his 60s stood there, clearly just woken up. I quickly explained that I needed somewhere to hide and a way to charge my phone. After a moment, he opened the door wider and let me inside. I asked if he had an iPhone charger. He said he'd look for one and told me to sit down in the living room. I took a seat, still wearing my nurse scrubs, my body shaking as fear, relief, exhaustion, and disbelief all washed over me at once. From the kitchen, the man called out asking if I wanted some water. I told him, yes, please. What he didn't know was that there was a mirror in the living room that reflected part of the kitchen. From where I was sitting, I could see him clearly. I watched him fill a glass with water, and then I saw it. I'm certain I did. He dropped something into the cup. After that, he stepped out of the mirror's view, but the faucet stayed on. It ran for another 30 seconds before he finally shut it off. He came back into the living room and handed me the glass. I thanked him, forcing myself to stay calm. He sat down across from me and just stared for a moment before asking me to explain everything again. I told him, as evenly as I could, that I really just needed a charger so I could contact my husband. He nodded and said, "Oh, right," then went upstairs. I looked down at my phone. It was at 1%. I used that last bit of battery to send my location to my husband, just in case. Then I lifted the glass of water and smelled it. There was no obvious scent, nothing that stood out, but I knew, deep down, that he had put something in it. Now I was stuck with a decision I never should have had to make. I desperately needed to charge my phone, but I was almost certain that water wasn't safe. I heard footsteps coming back down the stairs. He told me he didn't have any iPhone chargers since he used an Android. The moment he said that, I stood up and walked straight toward the door. I wasn't going to stay another second. Once outside, I ran down the long driveway and back toward the road, my stomach turning. I felt sick, shaking, overwhelmed, unable to believe that in one single night, I'd escaped two separate situations with two different men, both of which could have ended so much worse. I glanced at my phone. It was at 1%. I used that last bit of battery to send my location to my husband, just in case. I heard footsteps coming back down the stairs. The house was silent except for the faint creak of the stairs. Every shadow seemed alive as I realized I could not stay another second. I ran down the long gravel driveway, heart racing, moving as fast as I could toward the road, fog drifting along the ground, every sense on high alert. Once outside, I ran down the long driveway and back toward the road, my stomach turning. I felt sick, shaking, overwhelmed, unable to believe that in one single night, I'd escaped two separate situations with two different men, both of which could have ended so much worse.
Hello guys, thank you for watching my new video. So you like my video to subscribe my channel. So I am very thankful you are my regular viewer. So I bring a new video for a daily for you, and you like my video, so please subscribe my channel for a new latest video.